What happened when you're a parent and you learn your child has a rare genetic disorder?
And what kind of resources and support are most needed for families in life changing situations?
This is Enable the Disability Podcast, where we'll share stories, experiences, support, resources, and more for people with disabilities and different abilities. We are at Enable Podcast on social media. My name is Deaf Jeff Herbert.
And my name is Kurt Hauer. We're talking with Craig Thomas, the co creator of TV's How I Met Your Mother and author of the new book, That's Not How It Happened. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Craig, please tell us about Jacobsen Syndrome and how your son was diagnosed.
Yeah, my son, we didn't know until actually after my son was born, about a week and a half, 2 weeks into his life, that he had this rare genetic syndrome, which we had never heard of, and neither had many of the doctors. That's how rare Jacobsen syndrome is. You know, you're in new territory when the doctors are like, I got to Google that one. Uh, but it was a strange journey because he was born, again, we thought everything was fine in utero. This is, he's 18. So there are more precise scans in the 18 years since he was born that might have caught it. But at that time, we didn't do every single test. My wife was very young and we did this sort of basics of testing and it didn't catch this very rare thing. But then he was born and needed heart surgery. He had multiple heart defects, which were not caught again on the scans then 18 years ago. They were such small things. They were defects having to do with some of the veins and arteries and stuff, like very teeny tiny things that only a very intense scan would have found. So he was born and immediately was in this crisis. We didn't know why. We didn't know why he had these heart defects. Who knew? And no one thought to check for a bunch of days. It was just, let's fix these heart defects. And then at some point, someone said, let's do a genetic test just to see what's on there. And that was after his heart surgery. He had open heart surgery. It was like, very high stakes. He was this little, like less than 4 pounds baby. And he came through it and survived it. And then we were celebrating and the geneticist said, come meet me in the private room with no windows and lots of Kleenex, and sat my wife and I down. We're like, uh-oh. And she told us, there's this rare genetic syndrome called Jacobsen syndrome. And she confessed to us that she had also never seen one case in her entire time as a geneticist. This was in Los Angeles during How I Met Your Mother. This was between season 2 and season 3 of How I Met Your Mother. And so we began this unknown journey into the wilderness of a rare genetic syndrome that even the doctors didn't know a ton about. He has all kinds of different challenges and all of these wonderful strengths, which of course, at the time when he was this little baby, we didn't know he would have. Now he's 18. He's this wonderful drummer. We play tennis. He does all of these amazing things that at the time, I wish I could have looked into a crystal ball to see all of the incredibly awesome things he would go on to do. But in that moment, it's really scary, right? You feel very lonely, especially with a rare syndrome. But just when your child is born and there's any type of health disability or learning-based disability, any of it or all of it, you feel very alone, you feel very unprepared, and you really are. It really does feel like walking off into this unknown forest at first.
Right. We'd like to hear more about what those first few years look like. And then I was listening to an earlier interview that you did, and you talk about the drama show at home and at work. So Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
It was so strange. It was such a strange, by the way, I would have loved to have heard your guys' podcast at this incredibly lonely moment in my life. So just to take a pause for a second and say, well done to you guys for creating this space to talk about things like this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a public service. There wasn't, this was before podcasts, basically 18 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And there were websites. We were starting to find things online, but hearing people's voices talking about these issues would have been so healing at the time. So yeah, I felt very lonely, very lost. My wife did too. And what you just said, Kurt, is it was like I was creating a sitcom at work and then driving home to like an intense hour drama that was my life, and a medical drama, and all of like a dark indie movie at times. Like it was really weird. I felt like I was driving very much from one like story into another story, and it was really weird because I was supposed to go write this comedy show and be funny and write jokes. And at home, it was really, really challenging. But it was a gift because I did get to go into this other world with Marshall and Lily and Robin and Barney and Ted and this other universe. What was strange about it is, as a writer, the characters of Marshall and Lily are very much based on my wife and I. We were like the old married couple by our mid-20s. We met at the very beginning of college, and by the time we got married at a young age, relatively speaking, I was like 26, it was as if we were like the oldest, marriedest couple. Like everyone we knew was still single. We were like the first big wedding. We seemed like we had fast forwarded into adulthood. And that's one of the ingredients in How I Met Your Mother, right? It's like Ted's the single guy, and Marshall and Lily are this couple, and they all went to college together. Ted was kind of like Carter, my writing partner at the time, and the co-creator of How I Met Your Mother. And so I felt like I got to write versions of my wife and myself onto How I Met Your Mother. Obviously, it gets very fictionalized. There's a room full of writers all pitching their life stories too, and there's these wonderful actors who make it their own. But I felt such a connection to Marshall and Lily, like I was kind of writing about myself a couple of years earlier. You know, I was like in my early 30s, and I was writing Marshall and Lily in their late 20s. And I thought, oh, I'll be just writing about my life the whole time. You know, I'll have kids, and then I'll have stories to write on this pleasant, fun sitcom about parenthood. But then when I actually became a parent, it was not TV ready, right? I didn't know how to translate the experience I was having of parenthood, this completely unexpected version of parenthood that I was now living. It didn't feel like material for like 8:30 at night on CBS, you know, between King of Queens and Two and a Half Men. And then that felt a little lonely, like I was even disconnected from the fictional characters based on me, you know. And when they eventually did have kids on the show, I was very torn. Do I try to write about the complexity of something being there being something wrong, there being something medically wrong, is something challenging with this baby? And in the end, we didn't write it that way. And I look back with some regret about that. Like it could have been healing for me to do that. It could have been good to put that on TV at the time, right? You don't see that on sitcoms a lot, but I never quite figured out how to do it. And I'm not sure that CBS would have wanted me to do that on that show. But the regret that I didn't do that on that show sort of led to this book that I've written, in a way, right? I just felt like I hadn't gotten to put a story out into the world that speaks to that part of my life and is still a comedy. That's Not How It Happened is a comedic novel about quote unquote special needs parenthood. I hope it's funny. I didn't write the dark version. I wrote like, I hope this will make people laugh and also be poignant and also be true. But at the time when I was like 31 or whatever I was, I didn't know how to write it on How I Met Your Mother in a way that would have been authentic and right. And so now I've finally 18, almost 20 years later, sort of figured out how to do it.
Reading the book, it definitely feels healing, and I can see how it helps you as a parent, and a parent of a child with a disability, and you also see the humor in some of the situations as well, which is fantastic. But what kind of support or resources did you have at the time, or what kind of support and resources do you have now?
Yeah, well, I said how there wasn't your guys' podcast. There wasn't that to lean on where you get to hear people's voices talking about these things. I didn't really have that. My wife and I were aware. We were lucky that this was happening to us in 2007 as opposed to 1987 or 1957, or what the outcome would have been for my son. In 1957, he wouldn't have lived because there wasn't a good enough heart surgery to save him. In 1987, he may have lived, but we would have had no internet, and we would have had no way to find, and this is me answering your question, Jeff. We found through Facebook and through, looking things up online, we found a community, a small one, but a community of Jacobsen syndrome, which is, by the way, a genetic deletion on one of the 11th chromosomes. A little part of one of the 11th chromosomes is missing, and those missing genes lead to different health challenges and learning challenges for these kids. But there was a Facebook group. So we were able to reach out and connect with some other parents and start getting some real-time advice on, a slew of different questions, both practical and medical, and also emotional. Like, what the hell do we do now? How do we not have a panic attack every second of every day about not knowing what to do? When we first got the diagnosis, we were like completely numb and frozen. You know what I mean? I can remember that day because we had just celebrated this successful heart surgery. And then it was like, by the way, like I said, the geneticist wants to have the worst conversation with you could possibly have. And so it was just this roller coaster. And we were just sitting there numb. And a very dear friend of ours got online and started researching. She's very industrious. And she found that there is one expert in the world, well, one American expert, let's put it that way, one expert in America in Jacobsen syndrome. He happened to live and work in San Diego at UCSD, Rady's Children's Hospital is UCSD. We lived in Los Angeles. And she goes, the guy that knows what this is an hour, 40-minute drive away from here, Dr. Paul Grossfeld, who became our Yoda, who became our guide. That's who he is to this community. He's a pediatric cardiologist who works out of UCSD, Rady's Children's Hospital there. He is like the guiding light of the Jacobsen Syndrome community. He is a pediatric cardiologist as his main profession, but he researches the genetic basis of rare heart defects. There's all of these different heart defects, but only 50% of the kids with JS have the heart defects. Well, what is that about? That speaks to this larger cocktail, this equation of unknown variables within the larger genome that interact with the missing parts of the 11th chromosome. Why do some people have it? Why do some people not? What does that mean about how different parts of the genome interact with each other? He was fascinated by this, and he took it up as one of his main specialties, and in so doing, really became the only person carrying the torch of Jacobsen syndrome-based research. So we found him. Thank you, Internet. Thank you, Robin Murgio, our dear friend who scraped us off the floor that day by finding that information. And Paul Grossfeld, to this day, has become a dear friend. We do a lot of fundraising for him. The How I Met Your Mother community all rallied, and we would do big fundraisers. Even on the set of How I Met Your Mother, we would do these 350-person parties. The cast would participate in it. We'd do auctions. We'd do all of these things. And to this day, we do it. We still do an annual concert. My band, The Salads, did the theme song for How I Met Your Mother, and we wrote all the really stupid How I Met Your Mother songs, like Robin Sparkles and all that stuff. Carter and I, the way we started working together was as songwriters, writing songs before writing scripts. We do an event in New York at Bowery Ballroom once a year where we do this huge concert. How I Met Your Mother actors come and sing songs with us, and we do songs from the show. And we raise money for this wonderful man who, again, was like the guiding light at our darkest moment. So that was the single biggest resource. And he helped send us down a path of knowing what to look for medically, what to ask for in terms of early interventions for therapies. Elliot was 18 months old when he started speech therapy and physical therapy and occupational therapy. And we got involved with a local like therapeutic gym where he would go and do all of these exercises and obstacle courses and all of these different things to strengthen his fine and motor skill delays that are part of the syndrome. And we found an amazing school, moving forward that he went to from kindergarten all the way till age 18. That is an inclusion school, mixing people of different abilities together with people, with kids who are neurotypical, with kids who are neurotypical but are on scholarship from neighborhoods where they wouldn't have had access to this type of school. So it was a great school. That's called the Ideal School of Manhattan. We moved to New York right after How I Met Your Mother ended, where we're from. Basically, that one spark of finding Dr. Grossfeld, finding the community that started our path kind of through the woods. And all of a sudden we were starting to carve our own path, got out the machete and started chopping a path through that dark forest. And, you take it one step at a time.
Right. As you mentioned earlier, the Enable podcast is a forum for people to share their stories. And one of the things that we've heard is that parents, especially newly diagnosed children, they kind of go through this process. They kind of hit the wall. It's a grieving process. So one of the purposes behind this podcast is to let people know they're not alone. Our listeners would like to hear a little bit more about the book and the real experiences that led up to it, and also about why you chose to make it a novel about a child with Down syndrome.
Yeah, that's a great question. the book is born out of a few different things. One of the things that sparked the book were my failed attempts in TV and film to write something about this, starting with
You won an Emmy.
Well, no, I mean, like, meaning, like I already said it on How I Met Your Mother, I never quite figured out how to put it onto that show, how to put this real life material onto that show. But then after How I Met Your Mother ended, I tried a couple of times to pitch TV show ideas about this. My writing partner Carter and I wrote a movie script, a movie musical based on the first 6 weeks of Elliot's life in the NICU, in the neonatal intensive care unit. So it is, if you can imagine this, a movie musical with magical realism elements set in the NICU of a hospital. Is one of my favorite things we've ever written, and we spent years and years almost getting it made. We had Jonathan Groff and Kristen Bell attached to it at one point. And we were really close. We were like location scouting close. We had funding, some scheduling stuff came up, blah, blah, blah. Like some bad luck happened where we thought we were going to be able to go, and scheduling didn't work out. And the financing, COVID happened, and the industry changed a lot. There was a giant writer's strike, actor strike, and like it just never came back together, that project, which I know that was a very long roundabout way to also answer the other part of your question, Jeff, Kurt, which is that movie we made it was Jacobsen Syndrome in that movie. That movie was very specifically about like what it's like for brand new parents to suddenly be in this completely different story. And that was really me writing about that time I was just talking about. And we made it Jacobsen Syndrome. I wanted to make it a rare genetic syndrome because that is what we had gone through. And I wanted to write about that. You don't see a lot about that. That's why it feels so lonely when you do get that diagnosis and you say, I've never heard of this. And the doctor goes, me neither. I think I might have read about it in some, like, the end of some random chapter in medical school 20 years ago, but I've never really seen somebody with it. And we wanted to capture that feeling. And that's what that movie was about. And we spent, no joke, 10 years trying to get that movie made. That was called Molly and the Moon. And again, fictionalizing things also helps when things are really raw and intimate. For example, Molly is the baby in that movie, Molly and the Moon. So it just helped to I needed a little distance. We made it, instead of a little boy like my son Elliot, we made it a little girl, Molly. Carter had daughters. I didn't have a daughter at that point. I now do have a 9-year-old daughter. Who is, she was born at some point while I was still working on this. And it was like watching the years go by of not making this movie and my daughter's growing up. I'm like, boy, we've really been working on this one a long time. My daughter's, in school now. And look, I still hope someday that project comes back around, which is, again, me answering the question, why did I make it Down syndrome in the book? I wanted to write the book about something else. And again, I wanted to have a little fictional distance from some of these characters. This family that I write about in this book, there's a little bit of my family in there, but it's not 100% my family. The movie was really very much my experience. With this, I wanted to try something that was a little bit more fictionalized while still being very true to me. There are a lot of overlaps, both medically and in terms of developmental delays and challenges, motor skill challenges, different things between Down syndrome and Jacobsen syndrome. There's a lot of overlap. Elliot, my son, also went to this great school I told you about called the Ideal School of Manhattan that was founded by 3 moms of kids with Down syndrome. They invented a school for their kids because they didn't see a school that was just right for their kids' needs in New York City. And these 3 badass moms went, we'll make one. We'll invent a school. And one of those, I became close with one of those moms, Audra, and her son, Max, who was, I don't know, a handful of years older than Elliot. Elliot came into the school, and Max, Audra's son with Down syndrome, was like the superstar drummer. He was the drummer in like all school band productions. He was a really good drummer. He is still a great drummer. And he was just that kid you looked up to. My son was in kindergarten and Max was in 4th grade, whatever it was. And we just looked at this really charismatic, badass guy, Max, and we thought, this is an inspiration. This guy, like, this is what we're aiming at. And I'm a drummer, and I had a dream of teaching Elliot the drums. And he has fine motor skill delays, gross motor skill delays. He can't button a button. He really doesn't do handwriting. But he can type pretty well. But he has like real challenges when it comes to motor skills, except with music. Music is so magical. That's part of why that movie is a musical, by the way. Elliot can play piano, keyboard, play drums. Drums is 4 limbs going at once. There's 2 hands and 2 feet, all doing different things. And during lockdown, my mission, my project was, I'm teaching Elliot drums. There's nothing else to do. And he learned it because music is magic. And he became so good that I switched to guitar, and we became this little 2-man band like the White Stripes. And he's great. He's a great drummer. Like, legitimately, age 18, he's a really great drummer, Elliot, just like Max was ahead of him. So I had these wonderful real life people in my head, like Max and like Audra, to help inspire some of the characters. And That's Not How It Happened. So there's a bunch of Elliot in the character, and That's Not How It Happened, who I named Emmett. It's not like I changed the name that much. It's another name. But there's also a bunch of other wonderful people that I've encountered in the last 18 years on this journey. So I had so much to draw on. And I also, honestly, I didn't want to make this a rare syndrome story because of having written that movie, even if it never gets made. I wanted to write about something, in this case, that more people had heard of, just to have a different access point for the readers, and maybe speak to a wider audience than a rare syndrome would.
On the Enable podcast, we like to remind listeners that we're not defined solely by the things that we can't do when there's so many things we can do, like your son Elliot with drumming and tennis. Despite being mostly deaf, I also work as a wedding DJ. So, as a fan, I have to ask about How I Met Your Mother. In the pilot episode, Ted says, "Band, no DJ, people will dance," for a wedding. But in season 8, he tried to convince Robin and Barney that a DJ is better than a band. Is that an intentional change in perspective? What inspired that?
We wanted to show that over time people can just shift their attitudes on things. You start off so passionate about one thing, and then you overthink it and you switch it. We loved that joke but by the way, that line in the pilot of How I Met Your Mother, where Ted is saying, I'm not going to overthink this wedding thing, and then lists off this incredibly specific overthought description of what he thinks his future wedding will be like, down to the band versus DJ argument. People will dance. I'm not going to worry about it. Yes, you are worrying about it. That is Josh Radnor's favorite line in all 9 years. That little run, people will dance, because he loved how much it summarized how Ted is and how all of us are, where we're all trying to imagine and plan out life, even though life is utterly unplannable. And so in those 2 moments where Ted said entirely contradictory things, we wanted to just show that life is unplannable. Even future you is going to wind up contradicting past you. That's how unplannable life is. You can't even plan what future you is going to think and say. So it was definitely playing with that idea that over time we think we're going to all remain the same. We think that we can control life and predict everything. And of course, life will teach us the opposite over and over and over again.
What did you have at your wedding?
Well, it's funny. I sort of had both, and I sort of was both. I'll explain.
Okay.
That was a very cryptic answer. What if I just ended the call right then, and that was just the end? Like, what the hell did that mean? Okay, here's what that means. It was 2001, so there was an exciting new thing you could do. Cutting edge technology. You could burn your own CDs. Kids, CDs were these discs that used to exist that contained music. And all of a sudden, right around that time, you could make your own CDs. It used to be you had to make cassette tape mixes, which is, right. I don't even know if people under 30 even can picture a cassette tape. But I got very excited about this. I'm a huge music nerd, Jeff, which I know you and I could probably bond over for hours. By the way, there's a lot of music in my book. That's Not How It Happened. And again, thinly veiled, Emmett is a kick-ass drummer and a huge Pearl Jam fan. Emmett, the character, the young adult with Down syndrome in my book, I very much have music and the worship of Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder, which is, again, from my son and myself, is very much in my book. But I digress. But yeah, 2001, I decided to essentially be the DJ for my wedding because I burned like all these CDs, however many songs you could fit on each one, 20, 30, I don't know. They filled up at a certain point. And I was like, well, it's going to be 4 or 5 hour wedding or whatever it is. I'm going to just make these series of mixes and assign a friend of mine. Like, it was a guy in my band who knew like how a sound system worked, and I trusted him, and his job was to like switch the CDs through the day. This is the CD I made for the cocktail hour. It's more chill. There's some Elliott Smith on there. There's some Bell and Sebastian, like light indie rock. And then here's the dancing one. And then when I said I was also the band, I kind of was also the band, because Carter and my band, the Solids, who went on to do the How Much Mother theme song, we played a set at the wedding. So after we had like dance music on CD, these nerdy CDs I had spent months making. And then at a certain point we said, now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome the band, us. And we got up there and played with like my college band, the Solids, with Carter on lead vocals and me on the drums. And so we had both. It was band and DJ, and it was all DIY. It was all there was no professionals involved. In part because we had no money, so that helps too. You got to DIY when you don't have much money to spend.
That's right.
All right. Well, I'm going to get serious for a second here. And when you talked about Elliott, I could see the light in your eyes, and it sounds like you guys have a pretty special relationship. And one of the things that we like to do is talk more about abilities and superpowers and those sorts of things. So could you tell us a little bit more about that and what your relationship is like with Elliott?
Yeah, I can. I'll try not to burst into tears as I try to answer this one, because yeah, he is such a light in my life and our lives, for myself, for my wife Rebecca, for my daughter Celia, who's 9, and we sent her to the ideal school for kindergarten and first grade because we wanted her to understand her brother better. We wanted her to be in a school with people with all different abilities, all different challenges, and we wanted her early education to include that world and to gain that understanding. He's the best. When your child is born and you're scared of what that future is going to be, if I had a time machine and I could go back to past me, I would just love to tell that person who's walking out of that meeting with the geneticist, you will have so much joy from this boy. So hang on, I'm gonna get it back. We're a band together. We play tennis together. We make silly, stupid jokes together. We watch movies. It's extra emotional to talk about this because again, a thing I could never have expected. I'm going to hit pause there for 1 second and just say that my novel, the main subject of my novel, is this question of what does an adult life look like for someone with a disability, with an intellectual disability, especially. And so we meet Emmett, the character with Down syndrome in my book, in his early 20s, poised to launch into adult life, right? And all of these different challenges, but really, and everyone parents in the disability community, I just notice, all refer to that moment as the cliff you're going to fall off of, because that's how it feels. You spend 18, 20, 22 years, however, whenever you hit that point, so afraid of where is the place in this world for my child who has all of these other challenges and who may not be fully independent, and what does that look like? And parents, it's weird. Wherever I go, there are conferences for Jacobsen Syndrome where people come from all over the country, and they all call it the cliff. I'm like, was there some meeting sometime where we all decided to call this thing the cliff just to show how scared we are of it? But I talk about that in the book. And the book is kind of about the cliff. The book is about what happens after the cliff. What happens to this entire family as they kind of quote unquote go off this cliff together, and they have to all figure out what have our lives been to this point, really, and what are our lives past this point. And you hear from all 4 different perspectives, all 4 family members: the mom, the dad, the neurotypical younger sister who's a senior in high school, she's about to go to college. That's her cliff. And Emmett, who is at this kind of entering adulthood point. Now back to Elliott. Elliott just took one of those leaps off of that cliff and is so far flying instead of falling. He is, as we speak, at this wonderful school in Cape Cod for young adults with disabilities called Riverview, the Riverview School, And it is a post-secondary, like high school and post-secondary program for young adults with disabilities, that the aim of which is to also find employment opportunities and independent living opportunities, and it's educational, and it's activities, and it's everything. And he went there over the summer for their 5-week program, and we didn't think he was going to then join going there full time because it's his senior year of high school. We thought he'd come back and finish his senior year of high school, but he did so well during those 5 weeks that multiple people from that school called us up, my wife and I, while he was still there toward the end of the 5 weeks, and they said, you have to let him come here for senior year. We know you're considering it for post senior year as one of the options of what he could do for a college-like experience for a young adult like him. They said, do it now. Take the leap now. So we had this crazy thing where you're thinking the cliff is in one spot, and then someone says, we're moving that cliff up a year. Do you have the courage to leap? And we did it, and he did it. He made the decision. We made it his decision. We said to Elliot, take a week, take 2 weeks. Not much more than that, because we have to take our spot in the school beyond that. But we really said, and he said, I'm going to think about it, which was a really cool thing to hear from him, because he can be like quick answers sometimes. I just want to answer this. I want to answer that. We'll solve it right now. And he said, I'm going to sit with this and think about it. And he did. And he made a very reasoned, serious decision to do it. And that's what he's doing. We're almost a month and a half into, he's in Cape Cod. I'm in New York, and I'm missing him terribly. That's why I feel I'm extra emotional talking about it. But yeah, that's the leap we just took. And it's funny. I'm catching up in real time to the subject matter of my novel. I've been writing this book for a couple of years, inspired by, they say write about what you fear, right? Write about your fears. I was thinking about like write about what keeps you up at night, but also what you wake up for in the morning.
Well, I can imagine it's a challenge when the kids go off to college in any environment, whether disability or not. Um, but I'm also curious, did you experience any challenges when you were going out with friends and family?
Absolutely, we did. Absolutely. There, in the Jacobsen Syndrome community, and then this is true of various populations within the disability community, when Elliot was very young, and a lot of JS parents talk about this with their young kids, he would do these sensory seeking behaviors. He would pinch people, he'd pinch himself for kind of sensory input. And the thing that was really challenging was he would hit his head on things, on purpose, to get this sensory stimulation. He'd bonk his head on the edge of a table. So we'd go to a restaurant, and imagine also that one of the medical challenges of Jacobsen syndrome is that there's a platelet function disorder, which means you really don't want to have hard impacts to your head or any part of your body, because you can bruise more, you can bleed more. Sometimes it can be an emergency. But here was our kid banging his head on like the side of a table, which is so crazy to remember, because Elliot is such a chill, peaceful guy now. But there were chapters of his life where he had these extra challenges that in public, heads would turn at the other tables of the restaurant. What is that loud noise? What just happened? What is that kid doing? And of course, it makes you feel terribly lonely. He was our first child, and our only, our introduction to parenthood was this very complicated version of parenthood. So there were moments where it was really challenging. He needs a lot more help with safety and especially when he was younger, safely walking up and down steps. He has some sequencing issues, some depth perception issues. Playgrounds were really challenging. Like, we would go to a playground, and it's my wife and I both at the playground 2-on-1, because we need to constantly be following young Elliot when he's 4 or 5 years old, whatever, to really make sure he's safe. And we're in Los Angeles, and everyone else at the playground was like a nanny being paid by the parents who were wherever to sit there on their phone while the kids they were minding were like doing whatever and like not tracking. And the two of us were running after Elliot, like 2-on-1, and we still could barely keep up with all of the safety challenges. And then it was just like everyone else is on their phone and not paying attention to the kids at all. And we'd look around and we'd think like, wow, we are in a different we're in a different version of parenthood here. It makes you much more alert. It makes you much more engaged. It's exhausting. It's challenging. but you do connect with your child more than the people that are just on their phone taking it all for granted. And so that there are hidden gifts within the challenges, because I think I wound up much closer to Elliot than I would have been if it had been like, he's this easy kid. I'll just stay a workaholic and keep working really hard on my career, and he'll just grow up and be fine. I think it's like a call to action to be a very involved parent when your kid needs extra support.
Well, you've been a wealth of knowledge here, Craig, and I'm thinking that there's going to be a lot of parents listening to the podcast. And before we go, do you have any advice you can share with them who may be going through a similar experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if we were on mic when you said this, but and Kurt, tell me not to talk about it. Cut this out if you don't want to. But you were saying it took a while, Kurt, for you to want to talk about your own disability, right? And to talk about these issues. Is that okay to talk about on the pod?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
You just said that as we were chatting before we started, that it took a minute. And I remember that feeling when Elliot was very young and he had this very rare syndrome, and I was running a comedy TV show. And I was the co-showrunner of this thing. I was kind of co-head of like this company. And I remember wanting to pick and choose who I told the full story to, because I didn't want all the executives at the studio and the network and the actors and this and that. I didn't want everyone to look at me differently. Oh, Craig's going through this tragedy now. He's a mess. How can you write this funny comedy show? Again, this is entirely in my own mind, right? And so I sort of slow rolled who I would tell the full story to, who I would tell who I would open up to, and who I would really let into the complexity of what we were going through. And it took me a while to get brave enough to when I met a new person, say, this is what's happening with my son, which I now do. And I did learn how to do eventually when he was in his childhood. But at first, I felt like there was something to hide. I felt like I'd be judged in some other way. My son would be judged in some other way. I didn't want people to see him differently. I didn't want people to look at me and my wife and our family as this sad family with all these hard things, or again, all in my mind. And I guess I would just say to anyone that's starting this journey now that I'm 18 years into it, just start there. Start at the point where you tell everyone everything, because you will be surprised how much it helps to do that, and how it unburdens you to do that, and how you find support places maybe you wouldn't have thought you would, and people will come out of the woodwork to help you in ways you couldn't have expected. So that would be my piece of advice if I could go back.
And that's really good advice. Thank you.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful, Craig, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We're so excited for your book. We're so excited for everyone else to get a chance to read it. Thank you again for joining us. This is Enable, the Disability Podcast. We are at Enable Podcast on social media. Please like, follow, and subscribe.
And please share this podcast with your family and friends so we can share more stories of people with different abilities and stories that bring us all together. Thank you.